LexSeeHer is a group here in Lexington with the mission to make the contributions of women visible in Lexington. And we have initiated an effort to establish a monument to honor women in a visible place in Lexington Center. So our first speaker tonight is Kathy Jacob. Kathy was a longtime resident of Lexington, where she and her husband raised two daughters that graduated from Lexington High School. She is the Curator of Manuscripts at the Schlesinger Library on the history of women in America at the Radcliffe Institute at Harvard. Kathy has a PhD from Johns Hopkins University and is the author of 3 books, including Testament to Union, Civil War Monuments in Washington, D.C. Kathy has special expertise on the history of monuments and will speak about the importance of monuments. Thank you, Kathy, for joining us tonight, and I will turn it over to you.
So good evening. Thanks for coming. I've always liked monuments. When I was a little girl, once a month, summer and winter, my grandpa would pack up our family, my grandma would pack a picnic, and off we'd go to a historic house, a museum, a state park. My favorite were the trips to Gettysburg Battlefield. It was an hour away. And I was mesmerized by the monuments, the generals on horseback, the soldiers lunging with fixed bayonets, the dogs. So this first slide is Sally, the mascot of the 11th Pennsylvania Infantry, one of my favorites. I became a historian. I write about US history during the Gilded Age. And one of my books, as Betty mentioned, is on monuments. So it's not so much about the art and artists that interest me, it's memory. So monuments and memory, each one is a memorial. It's from the Latin memorialis, serving as a reminder. So each monument seeks to embody a memory in a very tangible way and to convey that memory to future generations. That's never been clearer or the memory's more contested than right now. Right here in Boston, with the wrenching struggle over the Emancipation Monument, the beheading of the Christopher Columbus Monument, you probably read about that in Sunday's Globe magazine. I'd like to talk about the importance of monuments and memory. And in the end, I'd like to end with some thoughts and images of monuments of women. So in 1864, Congress created Statuary Hall in the Capitol. You saw it in coverage, coverage of Ruth Bader Ginsburg's Lying in State. And Congress invited each state to send 2 statues of citizens, quote, illustrious for their historic renown and or distinguished civic and military service. In other words, men. After the Civil War, statues flowed in from the North and the West, but very few came from the South until 1903. And that's when Virginia announced its intended gifts. Statues of George Washington and Robert E. Lee. The outcry from the North was instantaneous. The GAR, the Grand Army of the Republic, flexed every political muscle that it had, and it had a lot. And its aim was to prevent what it was called the desecration of the Capitol building by a likeness of this treasonous conspirator. A tidal wave of angry letters, sacks and sacks of them, swamped congressional offices. And Virginia reconsidered. It waited 30 years to try again. Then it was successful. It wasn't just a bronze statue that these men were arguing over. The high stakes for which they were playing were quite clear to the proponents and opponents of the Lee statue. They understood that such statues were, and they very much still are, more than the sum of their stone and metal parts. Each one carries heavy, invisible, ideological baggage. Public monuments constitute serious cultural authority. They're important because by their mere presence and the obvious expense, they impose a memory of an event or an individual or a group on the public landscape that orders our lives. The American colonists who pulled down a statue of George III in New York at the start of the Revolution understood the power of public statues. And so did the citizens of the former Soviet Union and of Iraq who pulled down statues of Lenin and had Saddam Hussein, and the citizens of Boston who beheaded Christopher Columbus. Everyone who struggles over the iconography of public monuments consecrating FDR, Martin Luther King Jr., the Holocaust, the victims of the Oklahoma City bombing, 9/11, women's contributions to history. Betty, the next slide. This one is the one in Boston. The next slide. This is the one in New York. I'll talk about these again later. The people who erected all of these monuments knew the power of public sculpture. And it's abundantly clear in the ongoing debates about statues of slaveholders, monuments to the Confederacy, that those who embrace them and those who decry them understand their power. Public monuments weave an intricate web of remembrance in which certain threads are highlighted or validated and others are dropped and disappear. Now there's a difference between memory and fact. Whoever wins the battle for the monument wins the collective memory of future generations. If you look at a monument this way, the effort and the money poured into winning the monument wars are entirely justifiable. The men and women who raised Civil War monuments understood the link between monuments and memory, and they explained it very clearly to their contemporaries and to us. The motto of the North Carolina Monument Association was, "A land without monuments is a land without memories." A land without monuments is a land without memories. At the 1903 dedication of the memorial to General Sherman in Washington, one orator summed up the raison d'etre of all memorials for his audience and for us. The statues of the world are silent historians. So I'd like to shift gears a bit, and with these ideas of monuments and memory in mind, I'd like to show you some real monuments and suggest some things, excuse me, to keep in mind when planning a new monument. Not all monuments are good silent historians. Some of them are just plain silent. And one of them, an example of this is the next slide. So I don't know if you know where this is. This larger than life statue, it's in Harvard Square at the intersection of Mass Ave and Church Street. Do you know who it is? There are only 2 words on this statue and pedestal: Charles Sumner. So who is he? Well, because the statue is right outside of Harvard Yard, maybe he was a president. No. He's holding an open book. Maybe he is an author. Nope. He was a very important abolitionist, a powerful Massachusetts senator. He was revered in the North. He was hated in the South. He was one of the best known men in America in the mid-19th century. Now he is urban wallpaper. He's almost invisible. So what message does his statue convey? Well, he looks expensive. He must have been important, but who knows why from looking at it. Not all monuments are of real people like Sumner. Many include allegorical figures, often women. They might be peace, plenty, liberty. Not all monuments include people. Boston's Holocaust Memorial, Maya Lin's striking Vietnam Memorial in Washington, and the Civil Rights Memorial she created in Montgomery, Alabama. Not all are bronze or marble or granite monuments at all. World War I and World War II were followed by projects to memorialize the dead that benefited the whole city they were in. Many of you may have grown up in cities where there was a memorial stadium, a memorial municipal building, memorial hospital, the memorial library. There are other memorials that are created as a public good and amenity. Flagpoles, benches, labyrinths, gardens, clocks, like the beautiful clock in Lexington, groves of trees, parks, fountains. Do not attempt a fountain in New England. I'd like to move on to some monuments to women and one that uses women to tell its story. Here are some monuments to women. Let's start in Washington. That's great. No, yeah, that's perfect. This is a very early 1865 monument to women in Congressional Cemetery. It commemorates the 21 young women who were killed in a horrible explosion at the Washington Arsenal in 1864 while they were making cartridge shells for the Union Army. President Lincoln attended the mass funeral. The bas-relief on the front is badly eroded. Think twice about using white marble. And it depicts the flames and the billowing smoke that were consuming the sheds. Next slide. On the top, there is a neoclassical woman who's weeping for the dead. Next slide. This is Nuns of the Battlefield. It's a bronze bas-relief. It was erected in 1924, and it honors the more than 800 women religious who nursed the wounded in hospitals and on battlefields during the Civil War. And it includes 12 life-size nuns dressed in the habits of their orders. There's an allegorical male angel on one end, that's patriotism, and at the other, you can't see these here, is a female angel of peace. So the next slide. This is the Confederate monument. Ironically, it's the largest monument in Arlington Cemetery. It's the work of the sculptor Moses Ezekiel. It was dedicated in 1914. It's 32 feet tall, and it's overstuffed with allegory and realism. It's the saccharine epitome of the romantic myth of the lost cause. And there are a lot of women here, and that's no accident, since the money for this statue was raised by the United Daughters of the Confederacy. On top is the South. She's dignified, sorrowful, one hand resting on a plowshare, the other holding a laurel wreath to crown her fallen sons. Next slide. On the Magdalen frieze around this monument, there is a dramatic figure of Minerva, and she's holding up by the arm another woman depicting the South. This one sinking to the ground, but she's clinging to her shield inscribed, "The Constitution," and her sons and daughters are coming to her aid. Next one. There's a handsome Confederate officer kissing his baby, who reaches out to him from the arms of a Black nursemaid while another child hides in the slave's skirts. Next one. An elderly clergyman and his wife hold the hand of their son as he takes his leave to go to war. Next one. A beautiful belle binds a sword and sash around the waist of her virile sweetheart. I have to say this statue just makes me want to gag. But moving on to Boston. Next slide. This is Mary Dyer. Mary Dyer's statue stands on the State House grounds, not too far from where she was hung in 1660 for her beliefs about religious freedom. The statue's by a Quaker sculptor, Sylvia Shaw Judson, and it was finished in 1959. Anne Hutchinson. Oh, next slide. I'm sorry, this is kind of blurry. This is Anne Hutchinson. And this, I think, might ring true for those of you working on the Lexington Women's Monument. This 1922 statue on the State House grounds by Cyrus Edward Dallin was commissioned in 1920 by a group of women emboldened by the passage of the 19th Amendment. Hutchinson, who in the statue is sheltering her daughter Susan, the youngest of her 15 children, was banished from Boston in 1638 for heresy. She claimed that women's souls should be on an equal spiritual footing as men's. Next one. This fairly recent 1999 larger-than-life sculpture of Harriet Tubman is also known as Step on Board, and it stands in Harriet Tubman Park in the South End on Columbus Avenue. African-American sculptor Fern Cunningham depicts Tubman leading a small group of passengers on the Underground Railroad. And I'll end by going back to those two slides I showed you earlier. This is the Boston Women's Rights Memorial on Comm Ave. It was dedicated in 2003, and it shows Phyllis Wheatley, Lucy Stone, Abigail Adams. They're not oversized, and they're not on pedestals. They're life-size, at your level, and they invite you to interact with them. Next one. This is New York City's Women's Rights Pioneers Monument. It was dedicated in Central Park just in August on the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment. And it depicts Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, and Sojourner Truth. And they are, in fact, the first nonfiction women in Central Park. They join the only other woman, Alice in Wonderland. Both of these are by Meredith Bergman. So with this in mind, I'd like you to take a close look at monuments wherever you are. I do, my family finds this insufferable. Know that they probably didn't spring up without a fight of some kind, over imagery, over placement, over text, over memory. See if they speak to you. The best ones will. The continuing power of monuments to validate experience and to shape the collective memory rests at the heart of efforts right now, your efforts, to raise new monuments and to destroy old ones. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Kathy.